For centuries, chess masters have heavily preferred the bishop over the knight, with many saying it should be worth 3.5 points instead of the generally ascribed 3 points given to both knights and bishops. One reason for this is because of something called the bishop pair. Today, we're going to go over a couple of games that really illustrate what the bishop pair is and how to use it to your advantage, and why a pair of bishops is generally the best combination of minor pieces. Let's just understand the difference first between the minor pieces. Knights are very flexible. They aren't bound to one color complex like bishops are, and as a consequence, knights can theoretically travel to any square on the board from wherever they are in 6 moves or less. They can also use a game-winning tactic called a fork, and finally they can protect each other, which we call tandem knights. The bishops, on the other hand, are bound to one color complex. However, they can travel from one side of the board to the other in a single move, and when used together, they are incredibly strong. Furthermore, they can use multiple potentially game-winning tactics called pins and skewers. But lastly, they cannot defend each other. Now, this is what we call a closed position. Generally, if there are pawns in the central files, particularly if they're stuck opposing each other, like these ones, we call it a closed position. Now, simply because knights can hop over other pieces, they're not bound by the confines of closed positions, and as a result are much better than bishops. Here, for example, only a knight could win this position. In fact, not even a queen could break through this blockading fortress. On the other hand, this position, because there aren't many pawns in the central files, is called an open position, which bishops do much better than knights in. Positions like this are even better if you have the bishop pair, because here white has one bishop bound to one color complex, meaning that if black just puts all their pawns on light squares, their pawns will be safe from the bishop. With the bishop pair, on the other hand, in such an endgame, black is hopelessly lost. Speaking of endgames, most of them are open, and as a result, most endgames favor bishops, and especially bishop pairs. Furthermore, the only pair of minor pieces which cannot force a checkmate against a lone king is a pair of knights. It makes sense, therefore, that if you have bishops, you will try to open up the position during the middle game, and if you have knights, you will try to close the position. However, there's one slight issue with the player with the knight pair. It's much harder to force a closed position as it is to force an open one. Let's move on now to 2 examples of the bishop pair being utilized by 2 fantastic players from history, Capablanca and Kasparov. Starting from move 15 in this game, we have 3rd world chess champion Capablanca as white, and quite an incredible player in person, Milan Vidmar, who was awarded the Grandmaster title retrospectively in 1950 as black. In this position, think about what you would play as white. Pause the video. It's quite a difficult position. This is one of those positions you get out of the opening where you go, now what? And really struggle, right? Because it's a closed position and it's hard to know what to do. This is a very normal feeling. So there are 2 approaches to this position from what we've been talking about. You either try to keep the position closed and trade off your bishops for their knights, or break the position open and trade your knights for their bishops. Both are perfectly viable options, but today we are looking at the bishop pair, so we get to witness Capablanca's greatness with his move. Knight f takes e5. Wow. Knight sacrifice. So black played bishop a6. Why not take it? So pawn takes. This gives white a passed pawn, which not only just forks the bishop and the queen, but seriously cramps black's position. So after d6, bishop takes, queen takes, knight takes, the position is indeed more open, which benefits Capablanca with the bishop pair. And on top of that, black has 2 weak backwards pawns on dark squares. Realize that black does not have a dark squared bishop, white does, this is a recipe for disaster. Now, if we go back to the move that was played, bishop a6, something very similar happens anyway. White played bishop b3, then black took. After d6, bishop takes, queen takes, knight takes. The queens are off the board. We're getting closer to an endgame, and white is starting to look better already. After knight b7, knight takes, bishop takes, and black is starting to run out of pieces to defend those weak pawns. Pawn takes pawn, pawn takes pawn, f3. This nice pawn move severely restricts both enemy minor pieces. Black went with rook fd8, bishop e3, h6, rook ed1. Now, generally, when rooks look at each other like this on an open file, you don't want to be the one who trades rooks, because that concedes the file. Okay, black played bishop c6, because if rook takes rook, now after rook takes, white has the d file completely under control, and it's uncontestable. So bishop c6, rook ac1, bishop e8, king starts to get involved, and it happens anyway. They give up the d file, but in this specific scenario, at least black gets the c file. Now, we're going to apply a middle game technique called the restriction method. This was invented by Steinitz, the first world champion, which basically says that if you have the bishop pair, especially in an open position, pushing your flank pawns up the board will limit your opponent's chances for counterplay and will increase your advantage. So g4. And it's quite hard to play as black. I mean, you don't need to pause the video if you don't want, but what move would you play? You know, white's game is easy. They target those weak pawns stuck on dark squares because black lacks the dark squared bishop. Bishop d7 is what was played. Now bishop b6, it's so easy. Already here, black realizes they've lost the pawn. Just like that. This is how strong the bishop pair can be. They played bishop e6. Now you might be wondering, Jay, what about rook a8? Well, now after bishop c7, you see the e pawn is lost. Now, I think this line is stronger because if the a pawn disappears, then white has a passed a pawn. Anyway, now that the bishop pair has secured the one game, Capablanca no longer needs them and starts simplifying the win. So again, after bishop b6, what happened was bishop e6, and he just traded them off. He's got the one end game. Now, do you win the pawn? Bishop takes a5? No, you still have to be careful. That pawn is eternally doomed. But now that white has a one end game, black would desperately like to use their strong rook to create counterplay, something like rook c2 check. Instead, Capablanca was elegant, simple, rook d8 check. And after rook takes, bishop takes, white will snipe that pawn safely. The game continued knight d7, bishop takes a5, knight c5, and again, of course, even when you have a complete win, you still need to be careful. Don't just take, you'll get forked. Okay? b3 is what Capablanca played. Knight takes, bishop takes, and now white has an outside passed pawn. Knight d4, a5, and black resigned. Now, if the game had gone on, it might have gone something like knight c6, bishop c3, king f7, a6 liberates the bishop. Now the bishop can move. King e7, and now f4. Wow, what a wonderful breakthrough. Of course, if you do nothing, white will just win the pawn on e5, and then probably the pawn on g7. If you take, again, the pawn on g7 drops, the pawn on h6 is going to drop, maybe the pawn on f4, all of them are dropping. King d7, takes, e5, g5 is more than enough. With 3 passed pawns, it's very clear. The bishop was just too strong. Capablanca always made it look easy. but it was based on strong but simple foundational knowledge of strategy of the bishop pair. The next and final game was played by the 13th world champion, one of the three GOATs, Garry Kasparov. He was with the white pieces, and on the black side, no slouch, 9-time British champion who achieved 4th best rating in the world in the year 2000, Michael Adams. In this position, it's almost completely open with the exception of the d-pawn. So both sides should be happy to have an uncontested bishop pair, but it's Kasparov who finds the achievement. Pause the video, see if you can find a way to win the bishop pair. If you found g5, well done. Well done. Forces bishop e7 and now knight e5, securing the trade of knight for bishop. Just note that black cannot play bishop f5. That would lose to bishop d3. Black would be losing a piece here. In the game, black played bishop d6, and after knight takes, h takes, white is the only player with the bishop pair in quite an open position. c5. Taking would only open the position further. If black plays takes, the bishops have just become stronger. So black played bishop f8. And after bishop g4, moving with tempo, right, hitting that rook cd8. Lining up their rook with the white queen is a good idea, and generally white should just get out of the x-ray. But Kasparov was not afraid and plays the same idea back at black. Rook a e2. Wonderful. Now, if b takes c5, sure, white cannot take back the pawn, but they do have bishop d2, again winning a piece. So black played queen to d5, bishop f4, and again the pawn is not touchable. Black cannot just win the pawn. That would lose, of course, to queen takes, rook takes e8, and you might be thinking black could snag the other bishop, but after rook c8, the other rook is getting to e8 and winning a bishop with a lot, so that's just not possible. So going back, black did not take the pawn on d4, they took on e2, and then they played c6. The reason they played c6 is black doesn't want to lose the c-pawn and come under fire from the bishops. So c6 turns out to be a mistake though, because the bishops become dominating anyway. There's not many squares for it. Rook a8. After queen e5, queen takes, rook takes, and knight c4, Kasparov finds a brilliant strategical idea. d5. Wow. Giving up the rook for only a knight. So, knight takes, bishop takes, and this pawn could be getting through. So pawn takes, and c6. And the combination of the bishop pair in the open position and this passed c-pawn equals a win for white, despite black's 3-point superiority. Now, let's just enjoy Kasparov's conversion. f5, en passant, g takes, and now bishop e6 check first. Not bishop takes f6, which would allow bishop d6, and now black's lone bishop could keep our pawn at bay. Bishop e6 check first, and then bishop g3. The bishops need to be on these diagonals to help the pawn through. So black played bishop takes a3, bishop takes d5. Yes, it allows rook to c8, but that's okay, because c7, bishop c5, bishop b7. And now there is no choice for black. They have to give up the rook. And now white has found themselves a piece up in an endgame. a5, bishop c6, stopping both of those pawns. g5, the king starts getting involved. f3, keeping the pawns on the opposite color to the enemy lone bishop, stuck on the dark squares. King h5, and now bishop e8 check. Wonderful. Now, if king h4, king g2 would be possibly mating. So black played king h6, king e2, f5, and after bishop d8, black threw in the towel and resigned. But again, let's just show what could have happened, so it's a bit more illustrative. Let's say the bishop just stays on this diagonal, holding onto the pawns. King d3. The king will just make its way up. And you need to move that pawn, otherwise the king will take it. And now after king f5, black would have to choose between losing the g and f pawns or losing the b and a pawns. So hopefully now, through those games, you have more of an understanding of the advantages of the bishop pair and feel motivated to try to use them like Capablanca and Kasparov. So let me know if you have any questions in the comments or a video you want to see. And I hope you enjoyed. Thank you.